So here we are today at Lighthouse Beach on Sanibel Island, and what we're looking at our beach dune ecosystem right here. And what we have here, this is the interdune area. So this is the area behind our primary beach dunes. These dunes are primarily made up of, older beach dunes that have withstood, weather and erosion and rain and animals and a variety of vegetation. Right, and then beyond that, the older dunes, right, even further back, have a variety of things like palmettos, wax myrtles, oak scrubs, sea grapes, and so these are even more historical dunes further back. And as we go on this trip, we're actually going to go to kind of the interior of Sanibel Island, and we'll see some more of the actual coastal upland areas. Okay, so here we are at our beach dune ecosystem, and you have in front of us, we do have some sea oats. And again, these are some younger dunes here along the edge, but this is our primary row of sea dunes. And if we actually take a look at the sand here at our beach dunes, and it just rained, but the sand at the beach dunes is actually very, very fine sand. It's very, very small particles. And you can actually see the wind is catching it a little bit today. It's not falling straight down because the wind is catching this fine sand. So if you were to compare the sand at the beach dunes to the sand behind me here, all the way down by the ocean, the sand at the beach dunes is actually a lot finer than the sand down by the ocean. And that's because this sand here has actually been carried by the wind. So if you've ever been to the beach on a really windy day and you could actually kind of feel the sand sting your face a little bit, these fine particles of sand will get picked up by the wind and they will get carried, and what will happen is that sand will then crash into the beach dunes, right, these plants growing here, and the dunes will build up over time. Right? A real unique feature of sea oats is over time that sand will start to bury the sea oat. And as the sea oat gets buried, right, part of the sea oat stem down here, right, that is actually part of the stem of the plant, will actually convert to a root structure, and the plant will then grow taller. And so over time, the dunes will grow taller and taller, and what will happen is the sea oat will just be, it will have a long root structure, the plant will grow taller, and the beach dunes will grow up over time. All right, so next we're gonna actually move down the beach a little bit, and we'll talk about the back shore and then the foreshore, and we'll make our way right down to the coastline. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is we're gonna talk about the back shore of the beach, right? So we've got our sea dunes here, and then the back shore of the beach, this area that's between the foreshore of the beach there and this section here. And so the back shore of the beach is characterized by the sand that only gets wet during rainfall events, extreme high tides, or storm surges, right? So this area is typically not getting wet by wave action. And so if we make our way down the beach, right, and so we actually have some high water marks here because we did just have some storms a few days before I filmed this, and so we can see a lot of these shells have washed up here. But the foreshore of the beach, right, this is the area between the high tide and the low tide zone. And so the foreshore of the beach is the area that's continuously getting hit with wave action. And so, again, it looks like a little bit of a lower tide right now, but the foreshore of the beach is this area that's continually getting hit with wave action. If you've watched our video on wetlands and we talk about wetland delineation, one of the things that we talk about in that video is actually water signatures. And so, right, this high tide line, right, is characterized by a bunch of shells that have washed up, but sometimes you'll come to the beach and you'll have a line of, maybe debris or seaweed or the propagules from different types of mangrove species have washed up. And that line, right, this is a water signature. So this will tell us, right, a very common indicator of where the high tide line is. So a little more information about the foreshore of the beach. Right, we did say it's that area of the beach that's continuously getting hit with wave action. And so if we go down here into the foreshore of the beach, right, couple of unique things about the foreshore of the beach. So we're continuously getting hit with wave action here. And so that actually makes this a very unique environment that things have to survive in. So in the foreshore of the beach, right, two things, right? So you continuously have wave action. And what that wave action does, it actually makes it very difficult for plant life to become established, which is why on a high energy shoreline such as your beaches, you don't have any plants. You have this unstable shoreline of sand. The other thing is that this water is highly oxygenated. So you can see all of these air bubbles in the water from the continuous wave action. And so this makes it actually a really unique ecosystem for certain things that could survive here. And so I don't see any of them today, but sometimes if you actually dig down in the sand here, you will see, oh, actually here, we found a couple of them. We found one of our coquina clams here, and we can actually see one right there. You can see it, he's burrowing in, and got another one here. This one may not have been alive, but the coquina clams are one of, there's one right here, one of the unique species that can actually survive in this ecosystem. One of the things that helps them to survive is the ability for them to burrow quickly in the sand. So if you have a wave, it may expose hundreds of coquina clams, but before the next wave actually shows up, those coquina clams will actually burrow back down into the sand, and they will not get washed out with the tide. Another common species that's sometimes found here, sometimes they're called sand fleas or mole crabs. Again, you'll have a wave and you'll see these little white creatures scurrying around, but before the next wave hits, they've actually burrowed back into the sand. And what I had mentioned is that, you know, this water is a highly oxygenated environment, and so both of those species, if you were to take them and just put them in a bucket of water, they would actually not survive all that long because they're adapted. We can see all those coquina clams there burrowing in. Sorry, I wanted to catch that on video. But they're adapted at that highly oxygenated water, and so if you were to put them in a regular bucket of water without this continued wave action, they would actually asphyxiate from a lack of oxygen. So let's move on just a little bit, see if we can catch a few more coquina clams. Look, you can see them right there. Hopefully they're in focus, but we can see them quickly burrowing into the sand right there. So, really neat example of species that are adapted at surviving in this environment. Alright, so I'm not going to get into the water today, but if we were to wade out into this water here, we would experience a couple of things. So right here, I am standing on the shoreline, and as we move out, you're going to have a quick drop, and that is going to indicate your longshore trough. And so there's usually a current carrying water horizontal to the beach, and so it's usually going one way or another. And then beyond that longshore trough, there's a little bit of a sandbar, and so that's kind of where those waves are breaking out there. I see that line of waves are breaking on the sandbar. So if we were to walk out, it would instantly get a little bit deeper, and then it would get shallower, and there'd be a sandbar, and then beyond that sandbar would be another drop off leading out into deeper water. So out behind me here, this is actually the Gulf of Mexico behind us. And so from here, we're gonna make our way to actually the backside of Sanibel Island, and we'll take a couple of look at things back there. All right, so right now I'm on the southern tip of Sanibel Island, and I don't know how well the camera is gonna pick it up in the distance, but way out over there, that is the north side of Fort Myers Beach. And when we're taking a look at this whole area right here, this is actually the channel that's opened up between Fort Myers Beach and Sanibel. And so every couple of years, this actually gets dredged out. And so the real interesting thing about this is that it's a great example of our shifting ecosystems in nature. Our beaches, our beach dunes, our barrier islands, these are not permanent structures here in nature. And because they're not permanent structures, right, these openings between the beaches, know if you can see it. There's a dolphin way out there. Maybe it'll pop up in the video. These channels between our beaches have to continuously be dredged out every couple of years, and that's because they would naturally open and close on their own. And when they're naturally closing on their own, another spot would actually open up somewhere else. But because we have such an infrastructure on these barrier islands, every 5 to 10 years, we typically have to spend millions of dollars to actually dredge the sand that fills in these channels here, and actually we dump it back onto the beaches. So straight across there, it is Sanibel Island, and this brings us into our estuary in this direction. And with the estuary in that direction, that's where we're gonna have our brackish water. So we're gonna have a mixing of the fresh water that's running off from the mainland, and then we have our salt water in the Gulf of Mexico. The other thing, I don't know if you saw it floating in the water here, I'm gonna grab this shovel because plastic in the ocean is a pet peeve of mine. So again, I'm on the southern tip of Sanibel Island on this video. Straight ahead is Fort Myers Beach. In this direction, we have the Gulf of Mexico, and we're gonna head in this direction, and that's gonna take us into our estuary. Again, I don't know if you can see it in that direction, but that is Punta Rasa over there. That's where we're gonna film our tidal wetlands video, and we'll head over this way. And if you can see the bridge in the background, we'll look a little bit closer soon. That's where we're gonna film our mangrove video and our seagrass video. And so we'll take a look at some of that stuff in that direction in some of our other videos. Okay, so I am now on the back side of Sanibel Island, and I'm now facing the estuary. Again, in the bridge in that direction, that's the Sanibel Causeway Bridge. And so right here, there's the Lighthouse. So I'm on the back side of Lighthouse Beach here. And again, in that direction is the Gulf of Mexico. But as I head further in this direction, a couple of things we could take a look at, right? We can see evidence of our shifting shorelines. And so again, you know, at one point in time, these trees here, right, had enough land to actually grow as tall as they were. But over time, these beaches have moved, the sand has shifted, and these trees here are now in the water to the point where they're no longer able to survive. Another thing that you may have noticed from watching this section of video to the previous sections of video, there is a lot less wind noise because there's less wind. The other thing that you may notice is that there's a lot less wave action here. And again, we're now inside of the estuary, and estuaries are considered protected water. So we're still pretty close to the Gulf of Mexico, so I'd imagine this water here has a fairly high salt content where we are. But again, you could notice a lot less wind, a lot less waves, so this area is protected. And we're actually going to go to the other side of the fishing pier, and we'll even see more of a difference as we do that. And so again, from our shifting shorelines perspectives, right, this is actually a restoration project. So they put these concrete structures here. They've actually tried to plant some trees in them to, again, further stabilize this section of the shoreline, because beyond there, you can see it up there, they've got a road and a parking lot. It's a great example of, right, trying to put a permanent structure on a non-permanent piece of nature. So we're gonna walk on this way. I'm gonna turn the camera off, and we will pick up on the other side of the fishing pier. So one of the things, we haven't gotten to the fishing pier yet, but one of the things I do want to point out is, if you are somebody that does like to go fishing here in Florida, please make sure you're responsible about this. I actually found this pretty heavy monofilament line here tangled around this piece of wood, and so I'm able to maybe get it off of here so I could leave the nature and the life on this piece of wood in the environment. Again, sorry for the one-handed work here. Alright, so toss that back. And so I've actually got this piece of monofilament line off of that tree. It may have worked its way off eventually and floated around in the ocean. This is pretty thick monofilament line, and I would say this will probably take somewhere between 600 and 1,000 years to actually break down in the environment. And so it's a good thing we're able to find this today. So again, I ask, if you are somebody who enjoys fishing here in Florida, make sure you're responsible and, you know, don't cut your line. And if it does get tangled on a tree, you know, work your way over there to actually get that line out of the tree so it doesn't continue to ensnare sea life and birds and things for the next several hundred years. Okay, so here we are on the other side of the fishing pier, pretty much all the way into the estuary now. So again, that's the Sanibel Causeway in front of us. Fishing pier is to my right. Directly behind me, I have this patch of coastal upland, and we're going to go in there next. But on the other side of that, so if you crossed all the way over this, you would actually be on the other side of Sanibel Island that would face the Gulf of Mexico. So again, we're here inside of the estuary, so here we'd have a slightly lower salinity. Again, as we get further into the estuary in some of our other videos, the salinity is going to be less and less, and that's going to change depending on rainfall. But you notice we have very slight breeze and almost no wave action here inside of the estuary, and this is quite different from the other side of the island. All right, so here's just a couple of items I've picked up on the beach today. One of the things I always ask you guys to do is, if you go to the beach, when you see some trash, pick it up. I do have a lot of students, so when we go on a field trip, I always ask my students to bring a trash bag to the beach, and collectively, when we have our class going to the beach, we can collectively pick up a significant amount of trash while it's on the beach. So a couple of things: if you've got trash, make sure you're doing the right thing with it. So fishing line should, again, always go inside of, oh, sorry, the shovel's on the way. Should always go inside of these things. And so now I've got these other two items. You're like, well, this is plastic, I could probably recycle it, right? And so that's not necessarily true. So if you aren't sure if something is recyclable, it's actually better to put it in the trash. And I'm actually not going to throw the shovel away. I'll save it. I'll put it on the bench right here. Maybe some kid will pick it up. But I've got these old goggles I'm going to toss away. I'm going to put this shovel here, so maybe somebody else can enjoy it. But if you've got recycles, make sure it's actually recyclable in the area where you're putting that trash away. Because if you put stuff in there that's not recyclable, it actually contaminates the entire batch, and all the things that should have been recycled are going to end up going into a landfill. So as we walk along here, we are on the interior part of Lighthouse Beach here on Sanibel. And so a couple of things we could notice, right? So there is some water in here. This is primarily going to be fresh water because we did just have a significant rainfall over the last couple of days. And the species that are surviving here are primarily freshwater tolerant plants. So they do experience a little bit of salt water from like extreme storm surges, extreme high tides, and storm events, but primarily these plants are surviving on the fresh water in this environment from rainfall events and getting it into the soil. So again, the things that are surviving here primarily survive on fresh water, but can survive, you know, in a little bit of low salinity environments, right? Because they are going to be exposed to salt water at some point. So these environments on the inside of the island were, at one point in time, initially a sandbar, as just a barrier island formed. And over time, vegetation, primarily mangroves, would start to grow on the island. They would stabilize the island. And as we learned from our lesson on mangroves, the mangroves would grow. They would stabilize the shoreline. They would stabilize the island. They would create their own detritus as they dropped it down. So they're stabilizing the soil, they're creating soil, and the environment is growing and building up over time. And eventually that sandbar would turn into a somewhat permanent island. And over time, that island would grow into the barrier island it is today. And so this interior ecosystem here on the island, right, is a lot of old growth stuff that's been on the island for a significant portion of time. So again, it's a lot of coastal species, right? So you've got we're seeing a lot of sea grapes. We're seeing some older mangroves. We've got some different types of scrub oaks. We've got our palmettos and other common coastal ecosystem species growing in this interior ecosystem. All right, so because this is Lighthouse Beach, there's actually a historic lighthouse here. So I just wanted to take a minute and show everybody the lighthouse on this video. I actually don't know anything about this lighthouse other than it's historic. So here's the lighthouse in which Lighthouse Beach is named after. Okay, so I found this map of everything that we've looked at today. So if we zoom in right here where this glare is, that's where I parked my car. I think I actually took this boardwalk right here out to the beach. So we looked at our dune plants right here, our dunes right here, the back shore of the beach, the foreshore of the beach up here, and then we had our coastal trough. If we went out into the Gulf a little bit, we'd hit our sandbar, and then this would take us out into the Gulf of Mexico. We walked a ways around, and so then we were at the southern tip of the island. So the lighthouse was behind me while I was pointing that stuff out. So this was the channel that I had talked about where it eventually fills up over time with sand and has to be dredged. If we go this way, that's where Fort Myers Beach is. There's a particularly large gap between this barrier island and the barrier island of Fort Myers Beach. And when we look at our Bunch Beach field trip, I'm actually going to talk about why there's a sandy beach inside of the estuary at Bunch Beach. It is because there's such a large gap between these two barrier islands. So we continued on around here, and so this was that area where I had pointed out where they were doing some coastal restoration, where they put those concrete barriers in. They were trying to get the plants to grow. This was the fishing pier. This is where I was when I talked behind the fishing pier, and then I took this path through here. So we saw a lot of this coastal ecosystem, coastal scrub. This was, you know, again, historic dunes. So there's old mangroves, sea oats, some oaks and some palmettos have appeared in there. And then if we went actually further to the inland of Sanibel Island, so there is some tropical hardwood hammocks here, so we're not going to walk over there, but they are here, and some of the coastal scrub ecosystems as well. So this is the entire ecosystem that we've seen today. So I'm going to try and get closer. I don't know if you can see it in front of me, but there is a rabbit on the trail. And so again, here's another one right here. So we are in a beach environment, but because he ran right in there. Let's see if we can get him. We are in a beach environment, but we do have our interior ecosystem species living on this beach because, again, right, the beach is actually really just on the coastline, and it does have an impact on this ecosystem here, but the ecosystem again can support our freshwater species, like this rabbit. This rabbit cannot survive on salt water. And so actually, if we take a look right in here, we can actually see there is a gopher tortoise right there. Oh, he just went into his hole. So again, gopher tortoises, there are species that, you know, you don't necessarily expect to see on the beach. He can't survive in salt water. He does need fresh water to survive. And so we could see the gopher tortoise burrow right there.